Hello and welcome to Safe Pasture. My name is Sherry Hammers and we are now continuing on, chapter 112 of the Holiest of All in Jesus Our High Priest series. And the title of this is called Let Us Run with Patience, the Race. Andrew Murray starts out with Hebrews 12:1 as his text. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. He starts off, we have seen what life in the holiest is, in the place where the power of the eternal life enters and possesses us. Let us now look at that life in its visible manifestation as a race we run and learn what is needed to run well and win the crown. Seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, run the race. He says the first encouragement to run the race with patience is to yield ourselves to the influence of the cloud of witnesses that encompass us and to follow their example of faith and patience. So we were kind of talking about that in the last episode when we were talking about those who have inherited the promises, but we have possession. We're looking at these heroes of faith that laid down their very lives for their life with God. And he's saying we need to look at this cloud of witnesses and follow their example of faith and patience. He says, and so they become witnesses to its power and the great pleasure of God it brings to the soul. They all with one accord, Abel and Enoch and Noah, Abraham and Sarah, Moses and the prophets, as with one heart and mouth witness to us. Be of good courage, fear not, be strong in faith and persevere. The victory and the reward are sure and glorious. We are one with them and they with us. They could not be perfected without us. In us is to be perfected what they began. They held fast the promise when all was dark. They plead with us, now the full light has come, to hold fast the faith firm unto the end. He says, therefore let us also, even as they, lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. Here is our second lesson. One of the first thoughts connected with a race is the laying aside of everything that can hinder. In the food he eats and the clothing he wears, how resolutely the runner puts aside everything, the most lawful and pleasant, that is not absolutely necessary to his success. And that makes me think about, when Paul said, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. That sounds exactly the same. That a runner is going to, even if something is not a sin, if it's hindering his race, his race to the finish, he's going to put that down. I mean, maybe in a race it's not against the rules to carry a brick with you, but that would not help a runner in his race. And so everything that weighs us down, that hinders us, we are to put that aside. He says, sacrifice, self-denial, giving up, laying aside is the very first requisite on the course. Alas, it is this that has made the Christian life of our days the very opposite of running a race. I'm sorry for chuckling, but it is so true in our time. I mean, you have to remember, Andrew, this book was published in 1894. We're talking, 120 some odd years ago. And he's saying the sacrifice, self-denial, giving up, laying aside. He said that's the basics of getting in the race. Like, that's basic. And yet the Christian life in our day, they do the very opposite. It's like, how many obstacles can I put in my life? I'm going to have to just go there. All right. So a lot of what is hindering the Christian race, the race of faith, is that we are given, by and large, in the church and our culture, a grace message that is not accurate to the Bible. It's out of balance. And so people just kind of throw the gates open to the flesh because they're like, hey, I got grace. God doesn't care. He's good with everything I do. He just loves me no matter what. And they're putting all these weights on their body in their walk with God. And then they're wondering why they're getting weary. They're not getting very far, if at all, if they're making any progress at all. And they're doing exactly the opposite of what it takes to run a race. People have an entitlement mentality that they have a right to everything, right? And what Jesus said is, if any man will come after me, what's the first thing to go is the self. You have to deny yourself. And like Andrew says here, sacrifice, self-denial, giving up, laying aside. Nobody wants to hear that. No, especially in the culture that we have now, even in church culture. People do not want to do that. They think that like I said, they're entitled to do what they want to, and that no matter what they do, God will forgive them. Well, if you're truly repentant, God will forgive you, but repentance means that you've completely turned away. You've turned your back on the things that have offended God. You're not trying to push it with God and see how close to the edge of the cliff you can get with your flesh just because you think you're entitled to go to heaven, and you're entitled to have God's favor shine on you no matter how you live your life. It's really sad. I don't say any of this with any pleasure, but I think me and I know other people have called this out. Sometimes you don't know what the problem is till you diagnose it and find out what's wrong. You can't do anything about a problem that you don't even know exists. He goes on to say, the great study is both in our religious teaching and practical life to find out how to make the best of both worlds. I mean, isn't that true? Isn't that what church culture, they're just like, yeah, enjoy the world. Here, let me put it in Andrew's, let me let Andrew speak to it. He says, how to enjoy as much as possible of the wealth and the pleasure and the honor which the world offers. So is that really what we're trying to do? We're trying to walk this fence between the world and the kingdom of God, and we're trying to just get the best of both worlds? Is that what we're called to? I mean, I think Jesus calls that in the book of Revelation being lukewarm. When you're trying to combine the hot and the cold, you become lukewarm. And at least, I've never really totally understood that. I know I'm taking a little diversion here. I can't claim to say I totally understand that Jesus said, I wish that you were either hot or cold, but since you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. But I think Jesus, I'm just going to throw this angle out, that when you're hot and when you're cold, at least you're authentic, right? At least you're not trying to fake it till you make it and make people happy on both sides. But when you're lukewarm, you're combining the hot and the cold together. And God is not about mixtures. He's not about hybriding things. He's not about, he likes things authentic. I mean, at least you can respect someone who is cold. Like if you're talking to someone that is an atheist and they're not trying to fake being a Christian or anything like that. They're just like, I'm an atheist. Well, I can respect someone telling the truth. But when you're over here like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I go to I take in horrible media, and God understands. He's okay with it. Grace. There's more and more grace. No, you better check and see what God says. I mean, God does say, I am not mocked. So we need to make sure that our lives are not mocking the grace of God and the mercy of God, because we might find ourselves on the wrong side of the judgment of God. Okay, let's see. He said, with many Christians, if their conversion ever was an entering through a straight gate, like a narrow gate, their life since never was, in any sense, a laying aside of everything that might hinder their spiritual growth. It sounds to me like he's saying, okay, so let's say if you have a Christian and they actually did go through the narrow gate, they laid down all these things and they said, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. but then they picked them all back up again. And so they're not laying aside anything. They're just like, whew, got my ticket punched to heaven and I'm good to go. And, you know, I can go party like the world. I can consume media like the world because God forgives me. Well, you know, that's actually abusing forgiveness, isn't it? I mean, the word abuse means to wrongly use. So if you're wrongly using the forgiveness of God and you're assuming that God's not bright enough to figure that out, like he doesn't know, like you've got this under wraps and, you know, you're pulling the wool over even God's eyes. There's a lot of issues there that you need to take to the feet of Jesus. You need to throw yourself at the feet of Jesus and say, I need to get some things right in my life. He says, they never heeded the word. He that forsaketh not all that he hath cannot be my disciple. I mean, Jesus said this is the conditions. You know how people talk about God doesn't have any, he's got unconditional love, and that means that I guess anything goes and God will still accept you, but this sounds like a condition. He says, he that forsaketh not all that he hath cannot be my disciple. That sounds like a disqualification. Like if you're not going to forsake it all, you're not a disciple. But this is what we are called to be. This is what we are called to as indispensable. So this is something that you can't throw it out. Okay. It's not just optional. Laying aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. That's another thing. I don't think any of us, all of us need to really sharpen our attention to, is that sin easily throws us off the path. Easily. And I think one of the reasons it easily can do that is because we are born with a sin nature, a nature that is really, it accommodates sin. I mean, sin comes naturally to us, right? Sin nature, it comes naturally to us. So we don't realize in our everyday life, like our mind, our intellect will take over and be like, oh, we'll justify things. Oh, well, this isn't that bad. It's, I've seen worse. And no, we can't justify sin. Sin easily besets us. I used to tell my kids years ago that even what you think is just a little bit off the track, like you're like, oh, I can afford to go a little bit off. Well, I would give them the example that if somebody was in a small airplane and they had their course charted out and they were supposed to go to these coordinates, but they decide, I don't know, I'm a couple of degrees off, but it's not a big deal. Well, it may not be a big deal for 5 minutes of flying, but for 2 hours of flying, it's going to be a big deal. And what if now your airplane is over the ocean and running out of gas because the 2 degrees took you way out, way beyond where you were hoping to be? I'm going to see if I can remember. It just occurred to me. I heard a saying that, sin, you probably heard it too. Sin will take you further than you want to go. It'll keep you longer than you want to be. And I can't remember the third thing. I know there's 3 things. So if you know what it is, please put it in the comments. But sin will take us places. We're deceived into thinking that, oh, this sin won't mess me up. Yes, it will. And the fact that you're justifying sin already says something's messed up. You need to go to God. You need to get recalibrated in your spirit and get set back on the course. He says, yes, laying aside every sin, however little it seems, however much it be our special weakness, it may not be spared. So we can be like, oh, it's not that bad. I really like this show, or I really like this movie, even though there's a lot of trash in it so far. I mean, I really like movies like this, and the things in it that are bad, they're not going to affect me. There's another lie. There's another deception of sin, because we don't really know, do we, how badly that trash is going to affect us. We're not God. We don't have that kind of infinite knowledge about things. We can't see the future. We can't even see tomorrow, much less years in advance or years later to see how badly this trash affected us. But God sees it, and that's why God put a fence around it. That's why God says, no, these are the boundaries. Don't go past this. And he's not doing that to be some kind of a killjoy. He's doing that for our good. Just like I've said before, you don't let your child play out in the traffic, not because you're a killjoy as a parent, but because you want to preserve your child. God's in the business too of preserving his children. He says, sin must be laid aside if we are to run the race. Pretty simple. Lay down the bricks, okay? If you're going to try to get a good time on your race. There's nobody in their right mind that would pick up, a 5-gallon bucket of concrete and be like, I'm going to have the best time ever in this 10K race I'm running. That's insanity. Nobody would do that. But in our spiritual walk, we make all these excuses and we reason it out in our sinful nature that has no light, it's just completely blind to God. It's completely blind to life. Sin is connected with death, but yet we're taking advice from the sin in our hearts. I mean, it's just craziness. When you know God and you've got light shining on your path, to leave the path and go do stuff in darkness, it's just crazy. It is a race for holiness and perfection, for the will of God and his favor. How could we dream of running the race without laying aside the sin which doth so easily beset us? He says, therefore, let us run the race set before us. He said, a race means, this is our third lesson, concentration of purpose and will, strenuous and determined effort. Okay, so the race, if you've ever seen someone that has trained months and months to be, say, in a marathon, they have concentration of purpose and will. They're strenuous. They have strenuous and determined effort. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He says it means that man, while he is on the course, gives himself wholly to one thing, running with all his might. One thing. One thing. We have so many things in our life right now, in the world at large, pulling for our attention. But we got to be focused on the one thing, like Paul talked about, staying focused on the race, staying focused on the prize, which is God. He says it means that for the time being, he forgets everything for the all-absorbing desire to gain the prize. He forgets everything. Isn't it amazing? If we lived our life that way and we forgot everything that doesn't pertain to life and godliness, everything that doesn't pertain to God's purpose for our lives, if we just set those things aside, are you on social media? Social media, I'll just tell you, it's like time quicksand. Like you go into social media, it's like you're in quicksand as far as time's concerned. It's just, it goes and you're sucked in and under before you even realize it. So maybe God's saying to you, lay that aside. Maybe God's saying to you, fast this area of your life that's that weight that's hindering you. Maybe have a fast from it and see what kind of hold it has on you. He says the Christian course means this all through life, a wholehearted surrender of oneself to put aside everything for the sake of God and his favor. The men who enter the course are separated from the crowd of idle spectators. Okay, I highlighted that because, these idle spectators, if you can imagine like this race, right? And you got stands, you got spectators. Maybe it's a racetrack that's going in a oval, right? And you got runners. And you got the people sitting up in the stands. Well, if a runner has his attention on the people yelling from the stands, he's not going to have his focus where it should be. And so he's saying separate from the crowd of idle spectators. And we have people in our lives that are idle spectators. There's people that may be telling you you're stupid for running a race, or for putting that much time and effort, or for not coming and partying with them, whatever it is. He says each of them can say, The people who enter the course to run, one thing I do, they run. Let us run with patience the race. Ye were running well. Who did hinder you? This was as true of the Hebrews as of the Galatians. Many, many had gone back. Alas, alas, is it not true of multitudes of Christians in our days? They began well. Everything was so hopeful. But it would be utterly untrue to say of them today that they are running a race for eternal life. And there is no way for us and those for whom we labor to be saved this terrible fate, but for us to learn the lesson which this word patience is meant to teach us. So there's no way that we can be saved from the terrible fate of not running the race in a way that pleases God, but for us to learn the lesson of patience. Well, I'm saying that there's no way for us to continue. Like the people he said turned back. Like we could have the same fate if we don't learn the value of patience. And he says patience, which is endurance and perseverance, has a lesson to teach us. Under the inspiring influence of the cloud of witnesses to lay aside every weight and sin, to enter and begin the race is not enough. So it isn't. We can't just enter the race. He says we must run with patience. I mean, wouldn't you think it was crazy if somebody like they entered a foot race like a marathon or a 10K or a triathlon or something, and they thought they did enough just by coming onto the racetrack at the beginning of the race? He's like, no, we got to run, and we got to run with patience. He says, day by day, our separation from the world and sin, our giving up of every weight and every sin must be renewed. So we've got to do this every single day. We're running the race every single day. And so we've got to renew that. Every day we got to say, I'm laying aside this weight. I'm laying aside this sin. He says, day by day, our desire and our will to live wholly for God must be reaffirmed. Day by day, we must wait on God afresh to receive grace with all our heart and all our strength, with undivided purpose and in the boldness of faith, still to run in the race for God. Therefore, let us also run the race with patience. So we need to wait on God. We need to receive grace with our heart, with all our heart and all our strength. We need to have undivided purpose. We need to have boldness of faith to stay in the race for God. Therefore, let us also run the race with patience. And in closing, he says, get clear hold of the three elements of success in a race. The first one is self-denial that gives up everything that hinders. The second one is decision that puts the whole heart into the work. And the third one, puts the whole heart into the work and runs. And the third one is patience that day by day afresh enters the course. Well, I hope this has encouraged you to stay strong in the race that you're running for God daily. And thanks again for tuning in. Hope to see you next time. God bless.